Hello SGD, this video will be about Sacsayhuaman. Looking at a few questions. Now, was it a fortress? Was it ever completed? Looking at methods of the construction or telltale signs that are left in there. So here we see on top of this hill ridge plateau looking out over the city of Cusco, which was the Inca capital city, and overlay this old black and white photo. So just to get an idea of compared to how much urban expansion there's been, but compared back in the day, a lot more trees and such. But so the questions: was it ever completed? Was it a fortress? Aerial view we see, and the sawtoothed walls which get the most attention, but there's quite a bit else going on there. Another aerial view, and again the walls that most get the most attention. There they are there. We see 3 layers as well. These are on the northern side of this part of the complex. So we have a lower tier, the middle tier and the upper tier. You notice that there's in different light, they have a different appearance, which is an interesting feature, and the play of light and shadow as well is an interesting one. So in the main car park as well, so along the top here we can see the map, and I've numbered these walls according to Jean-Pierre Protzen. And we'll start with wall sections 1 and 2. You can get a trace of them there. The lower tier is hidden behind this earth. You get a bit of an idea of it there, but alright. So here marked in the red is what is visible of the wall sections 1 through to 13. There's the numbers now, because they hook around. We can't the even numbered ones on this part, so they're not as visible, but we'll get to those. So let's start with sections 1 and 2. There's a photo looking at from the corner, and especially wall section 2, get a good view there. Important feature will come to this repeated, that there is no L block, no corner or turn. That each of these walls is pretty much just butted up against one another. So taking those photos and made a composite, so 1 and 2 have flattened it out. You do a tracing of it, and it gives you an idea of the way that they were built. The bottom and the sides were fitted, but the top of the stones are quite jagged and unfinished. And this again, it's an idea of what the construction method was, where they laid out prepared before. Maybe the bottom layer was, but as we'll see, the upper layers tended to be very rough, and then they were brought down to shape. So this is not the only example of this. Wall sections 3 and 4, some of them I've taken from Google Earth, Google Street View, just to supplement the great photos I got from David Morley. So 3 and 4, there we see 3 and 4. These tool marks, I'll show examples of this. You'll see quite common, and again indicating partially finished. So sticking on wall section 3, notice we're going to see these little leverage points, little indents on the bottom of the stone. We're just going to point out these because these and others like them are on the face of the stone, and they tend to be only on the second or the third tier, never on the bottom tier. Could be that they were there in the past, but I reckon that the reason for this was to support the wall while it was being infilled from behind. But I'll bring these up as well. Now we see this stone from the front, but we can see it from the side. But if you compare it to those, so I think these pieces at the back here is where this block has been banged off and damaged, and so because you couldn't just get it, you couldn't get a stone on top of that. It's so thin now. Now in this particular corner there is a L block or a corner return. It's not very deep, so not structural. It's also quite unfinished as well, and you'll notice in a lot of these stones there are different levels of finish. Now again on the bottom of those stones, these leverage points, these indents, they run sort of a lot of attention given to the bosses or the protrusions, the nubs as they call them, but which would be very useful for levering points, lifting points, that type of stuff. But you'll see these very often, these indents. Also the drain, I'll come back to this later, important feature, because in Coricancha, for instance, in Cusco City, drainage is ever so important on these walls. and we'll look at what's happening in a moment. So now up to section 5 and 6. Here on the corner, because that corner piece is missing, so again we can see what the structure was like behind. It was essentially a rubble infill, compacted earth behind. The terrace, the infill, the rubble behind is supporting these walls. They're essentially only there for waterproofing, and I'll show you examples of that in the... they're not even really a retaining wall, they're a facade just to protect water and stop the terrace itself collapsing. I'll show you more in that in a moment. Again, these leverage points on the bottom of the stones, sticking on wall section 5. These are leverage points, but also on the face of the stones, and again, not on the bottom but on the upper levels. Almost certainly where you put posts in there to support the stones and stop them falling over. These walls are very thin. Keep that in mind, I'll show you in a moment, but they're not really retained. These are covering walls, not even really retaining walls, because they're not really retaining anything at all. We'll see, as you'll see in a moment. We get some of these tool marks as well, less prominent here. In other parts they're still much more prominent. So 5, and now we see the corner with 6. And I would guess as well that this is probably a piece of bedrock. I'll come back to that in wall section 17. You can also see the gap here. This is an entrance point. There's 3 of them on the bottom tier of the main walls. Zoom in, there is a ever so slight corner return, but again it's not really locking the wall in so much. And we see these tooling marks as well. There's the entrance. This is there are 3 entrances on the bottom tier, one on the eastern side here, one in the middle and one towards the west. And this is a view of the entrance through wall section 6 from behind. And you can also see where I'm almost certain that that's modern restoration work, and that these smaller polygonal stones, or not even really polygonal, just say well-fitted stones have been removed. And there's this restoration work, and again you sort of get an idea of what's happening behind. Okay, so that's the entrance. Now 5 and 6, just a composite between those two. Because of the angles there's a bit of a difference, but just to give you an idea of, in a bit high resolution, what that corner looks like. Next section, 7 and 8. 5 in the background, we see a close-up of 7. Again, the leverage points there in the bottom of the stone. And especially here we can see an unfinished piece, but leverage points down there, focus in on there. Again we see these tooling marks. One of the possible, still now as they describe, impossible claw marks. The standard way of masonry is to chisel out a row of trenches, and then that ridge that's left in behind can be knocked off much easier. Saves a lot of work from just doing the whole stone. These type of tool marks, similar, can be found in Alante Tambo, also very similar to the ones in Egypt, especially in Aswan quarry. We see the corner of 7 and 8. Again, not on the bottom but further up we have those holes in the stone, and there is no corner return at all. Also tool marks there. Now they tend to be vertical. These ones in this case are horizontal. Wall section 7, if we do a tracing. So again we can see that this section is very rough on top, unfinished, again indicating how the method in which the stones were built. You've fit the bottom and the sides, then you would bang these out, the shape that's left over, then you would fit the next stone on top. So Jean-Pierre Protzen, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, was it ever finished? So just like we saw in sections 1 and 2, we'll see in other places as well, this is one of the really strong evidence that it was never completed. Also in that same piece, the destruction of there, so we read the dismantling of a fortress started in 1537, so basically as soon as the Spaniards arrived they started tearing it apart and using it to construct their own buildings down in Cusco. Antonio de la Gama, Lieutenant Governor, tried to halt the demolition by imposing on May 13, 1561, a fine of 100 gold pesos for anyone caught removing stones from the fortress and the wall. temporarily success, but in the long run people went straight back to quarrying these stones, and that this was being still used as a quarry up until the beginning of the 20th century, or our century, as described by Valcárcel, 1934. This is on those main walls that we're focusing is on the north. This is on the southern side of there, and what's interesting again to see that the quarrying was still going on. Stones were being removed, so you can see these, especially along here. But the terrace wall remains, and this is an important feature. It's the walls were just a veneer over the top. It was this terracing behind, and you can see the little stones and stuff embedded in there, compacted earth. Very important feature. So if we go back to the car park, the main entrance, again, you can just get a peek of that wall section I'm just talking about, 7. But if we focus in here, so again, it's often, lost Thai technology, ancient art in types. This is just, the Inca couldn't do stonework. This is their crude repair, restoration work afterwards. But what's actually been happening is that these walls were dismantled and reused, especially after the arrival of the Spanish, and kept going on right up until 100 years ago, not even. So we see some restoration work, but where it's been left over now, that even after all this time, the terrace is in still a pretty good condition. This goes to speak to the really important engineering skills of the Inca, was their control of water and earth, especially in terracing. So again, modern reconstructions, and I'll show you why we know it's modern reconstructions in a moment, but also where the wall has been removed, but we still see this compacted earth and reinforced terracing behind. It's still, standing. If this was just piled up earth and you took away the retaining wall, with some heavy rain, it would just turn into wouldn't have these sharp corners and sort of vertical sides. So back to this part, and we see even with the stones removed, the terrace is there. These stones are just a veneer, basically a waterproofing to protect the terrace. Here's a Google Earth view of that same place, and if I overlay that, you can. So notice, even if all that time, it's still, it's starting to smooth out, but okay. Now, back on the northern side, on the second tier, part of a wall has collapsed, and it shows you what is behind. And again, it's this reinforced. So it's basically a hidden wall behind the wall, compacted earth. That's what's supporting the wall itself. Those walls, including the heavy stones down on the bottom, and the heavy stones are really on the ground level. Above it, they're relatively small. They would just be pushed over. There's no mortar bonding them together. They're not pinned in. There's nothing holding these things up but gravity. And if it wasn't for the earth behind them, they would collapse on their own or get knocked over very easy. It's the terrace behind that's really important. This is just waterproofing. So, just paraphrase Mike Haddock, there are 2 types of retaining walls, ones that are going to fall over and ones that have fallen over. And it speaks to the skill of the Inca, that they were able to build these walls and that they last for so long. The amount of force, as gravity pushes the dirt and water gets in, even really strong walls, retaining walls are going to fall over. But theirs have lasted really long, and that goes to the technology is the construction of the terrace. Nothing is supporting that wall from falling over. They tend to build at a 3 to 5 degree angle. Backslope, this is a common feature in all Great Wall builders, Romans, Greeks, Persians, and so forth. That's in Japan. Recent video I showed on those masons, they're rebuilding an old wall as well. Cool picture of a restoration project in Lalipata, just about a kilometre to the west, and an interesting method of, you don't need lasers to do this. Build a frame and a string line to guide the build. sticks and strings. But again, the organs and the spine, the skeleton that made Inca possible was this terracing in the country, using earth and water to build their civilization. So it's not just the terrace of the farms; it's also the road, huge road system they built as well. So these type of walls, they're like crude, as Brian Foster likes to, Inca work. But if you add all these up together and then compare, would you rather build thousands and thousands of these or a handful of that really nice polygonal work? I'm not even going to try and pronounce this place, but it's earth walls and the control of water is, and so just like with the Romans, the water and the roads is how they built their empire. On the sides of mountain, these terraced farms. Now even notice the shape of the earth itself and how it runs over the top of the wall. Again, control of water. So there's natural springs, but this is also about removing water from, directing the water and removing it from behind the walls. Any retaining wall, build up of water behind is just death for those walls. So here we go, a section, but now let's have a look. So again, walls are angled backwards. The fill behind the wall is reinforced and compacted. This is just to stop the heavy rains eroding away at the base. These are all dry stone walls. They're not pinned down, they're not mortared down. Grass grows over the top of the wall. It's not like the wall's not higher and then the grass grows behind, because that's going to catch the water. You want the water to run off, and that's another reason why they're sloped for runoff. And also very genius understanding of hydrology and drainage to direct the water to where it's useful, but just as importantly to remove it from where you don't want it to be, which is building up behind these terraced dry stone walls. So places like this, and there are a lot of them, and these type of walls, so they're not that polygonal super work, but this is the bread and butter. By being able to master and do this on such a huge scale, that you could make those very limited amount of really finely dressed, finely fitted polygonal walls. So yeah, this is the terracing and these other buildings, they paid for the much fewer, much less polygonal walls, and the genius there is in their engineering, hydrology. So drainage, it's all about that on the mountainside. Even like here in Machu Picchu, again, building the drain into the wall to direct it away. And it's not just like they're regularly spaced, they knew where to put them. So there was a design understanding of the way that the water works to place these and get the water away. So that's the real genius of the engineering. So back to wall section, so we're at 9 and 10. Bit of a better view of 9 on more high res. Again, notice the tool marks, and as is usually the case, not exclusively, they're vertical. You see the corner, there's no corner return, and again we have these indent leverage points. No corner return. Again, the tool marks, processing up there. Also a slightly discoloured stone up there, it's fitted in there, just I thought I'd point it out. Up to 11 and 12, so there's a bit of 1 of 11. Again, the being able to lever the stone in, to do levers such as this, even on the heavier stones, because you're only going to need to move them a little bit just to get them right up into position. Staying on 11. Again, the leverage points there, and remember this block, this is we'll use that as a reference in a second. So that's the same, there's that big larger stone. Now again, these stones are forming a wall, they're not a block, so it doesn't go back meters and meters, they're just a covering over the top. So the weight gets exaggerated because people assume that it's as deep as it is wide and high, but that's just not the case. those tool marks, but now they're at an angle. Could have been that they were worked on the ground conveniently and then placed in there. But again, you see those ones again running vertical. There is a slight corner return, but once again, it's not structural. I would guess that they didn't. The reason they didn't want corner returns was because they'd worked out that it's better to have these walls separated and just butted up against one another, because you haven't joined, possibly but they built really well to withstand earthquakes, and so I think there's probably they learnt by experience what to do. Now we go to sections, wall 13 and 14. Zoom in a little bit. Again, you can see, especially when the angle of light is right, a lot of things get revealed. And remember this stone up here, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So focus on wall section 13. Again, the leverage points. Those, again, they're always up, not on the lowest level. And this stone here, again, it's very not dressed even slightly, has been fitted, and we get a view of it from behind. And it's worth noting, that from behind they're not fitted as they didn't need to be, and also worth noting that the ground level is now lower. So I don't know. This is not a good sign that they should be running over the top of the wall. This is going to catch water, and it's going to make those walls not so good in the future. Here's a section of video now. We're right behind 13, but notice that I'm going to point it out, that stone. That one at the top has a groove running across it. It's not two stones pillowed together. There we see it as well. Now even notice the modern repair work. But that stone there, that's a groove running across. We can identify that. Pardon. Now we go to this older photo. I posted on this so we can see that stone was that way going back like 100 years now. So I go to another section a little bit further up, but this stone here, we close up now. Again, we have grooves cut in it to give you the appearance of multiple fits coming together. So just like the pride of a modern reconstruction, different theories whether this was a new attempt or whether this was older, but it does go back some time. One of the possible explanation was that they wanted to quarry the stone and then split it up, but that doesn't make sense because there's so many smaller stones of roughly that size that these almost certainly has to go back to the original build time, because it just doesn't make sense that they would have done those grooves to split them. Now we can see the wall from behind, so that's wall section 12 from behind. Again, not dressed. Wall 13 from behind. So again, on the outside, beautifully fitted. On the back, don't need to be because it's going to be infilled and covered over. There's that odd coloured block as well. So another section of 13. Also some tooling marks there as well. So I think those grooved zones that I mentioned, they're cheats that go back to the build time rather than recent reconstructions or attempts to quarry that stone, because this was not necessary. There's so much of it already going around. So wall section 13 and 14, we see the corner. Again, a slight corner return, but pretty much separated. And here we see an older photo, and that is that same section. What's interesting is we see white marking there, and I was trying to make sense of what that is, but I'm pretty sure that is from the Aprista or the APRA party. So it's an interesting little side note if you're looking at Peruvian history, basically from the 1930s and what was happening with there. Again, that older photo, we can see that stone, that corner, and there it is from the other angle. I'm sure this was like a historical, reenactment going on. I doubt that this photo would have been taken in actual action, but we do get a hint. We can see where that stone is as well. So that's there now. On to the next sections. That's 15 and 16. 13 in the back, but here 15 and 16. Interesting, again we see these tooling marks in that undercut section. Focus on 15. Now notice, again, this is not crude Inca work, and we can prove that. So we go back to this photo, and we see these sections 15 and 16, and we can see people sitting on top of the wall here. So this is a recent preservation work, just like in the earlier sections I showed. Now focus on wall section 16. This is what, so stone A, 16A, and I'm just calling them A and B. This is what they look like from behind. Of course it has to be reversed because it's from the other side. But again, I'm almost certain that B is natural bedrock, and I'm inclined to think that A might be bedrock as well because of the condition and the colouring and stuff. Recent videos I mentioned a bit about that. We'll show a little bit in a second. And we also have a shim inserted in between. So I tend to believe that this was a natural outcrop, had a bit of a crack in there. They dressed it up a little bit and inserted a shim to fill in the corner. Similar style was done in Alante Tambo, so the monoliths, but what we actually have is they weren't fitted perfectly together. They just inserted smaller, lighter stones in between. And also on 16 we have an indication that unfinished. Again, this could be part of it. Now they wanted that in the design, but given the other examples and some of parts are finished, other parts are unfinished, such as these, that more I tend towards that this is an incomplete site. They never got the Spanish arrived. So 15, 16, now let's look at 17, and so we get an angle from that stone that I showed. Again, it looks to be bedrock. The colour of it as well, because of the bedrock of the area. And again, in a better view, so we have wall section 17 with this large block. This is the main I mentioned earlier, 3 gates on this lower tier, and this is the central one. But is this bedrock? Well, this is at Lali Pata. Again, this is a piece of bedrock. Again, it's been carved out. The same orange running through. This is at Amaru Makawausi. And just that whole area has, when you see the natural bedrock, has this colouring going through it. The Inca in all of their sites incorporated natural bedrock, or just as a standard feature. So why wouldn't they at Sacsayhuaman? Now we start to look at section 18. Okay, before that, that's the entrance gate, and that's the view from behind. Now sections 18 and 19. Did a video not too long ago looking at the weights of it. Now it's just stated there from 150 to 200 tons, and this stone is often referenced. In that last video I estimated it 62. Since then I was able to get an exact height of someone as a reference. I assumed that they were 6 foot. I got their height, and they're a little bit shorter than that, and so revising that, instead of 62 this would be at probably a maximum 55 tons, and instead of this being 120 tons, be about 102 tons, and it's about 18 and a quarter feet, or 5.6 meters high. In that earlier video I said it was 20.5 feet. So yeah, again the weights are highly exaggerated. Here's just another view of that same area. So wall 18, 17 is that doorway where we go in, but we can see above, and again notice this repair work that's been done. And how do we know it's repair? I'll show you in a second. Here's an old photo. That's Cheech, as I called him in that earlier video. And again we can see where it was still a bit more overgrown, cleaned up, and there we see Cheech. Now we see this snipped that photo, and so there we see Cheech. And we can see what's going on over here. People standing there. So just as those, just to highlight where those stones are and where those people are standing, that's where the stone is now. So this is all recent repair work. It's not crude Inca work, therefore cataclysm, therefore lost ancient civilization built this place. Now from that you can see that's modern repair work coming around the corner, so that wall that goes up pretty high. And again, that's repair work, and this stone here, just as a reference, is that stone there. That's the one at 102 tonnes or less, because from the back you get an idea that they're probably missing the corner. They've gouged it out, and it's just, so 102 maximum. So wall section's 18. Again, it's just cheat. This is the one that if you look up the photos, giant stones, this is almost always the one that you'll find people standing in front of. And there's cheat as well, but just see the side. And again, there is a sort of corner return block here, but once again, they're just basically butted up against one another. Each V is just slammed up against the other one, and probably for a very good reason, because they knew what they were doing. Alright, so 18 and 19. Again, we see the leverage points there on the bottom. Is an older photo. I just snipped out the section so we can see this stone is that stone there. Again, you can tell just by a comparison. You can even see the leverage points underneath there, just here versus, now versus then. And then we come to 19. This is where the David Morley photos I got. Again, thank you very much, Dave. These photos were so bloody helpful in making sense of this place. And so the next wall section we could see is 21, and now we're going to go. I'll show you a photo standing on top of this, standing on top and behind, because this is very telling as well. So now we see wall sections 21 and 22 from behind. From the front, beautiful polygonal joined, nicely fitted masonry. From behind, that's what they look like. Again, there's even some leverage points there from the back. Again, this is quarried stone. They're not, they're not cast, just or molded or any. We know that you can find the quarries and that, and the tools and all that's been found, and they work. It's just can you accept that people took time and put effort into building things? How do you think those beautiful cathedrals and old stonework was built, even in the 17, 18, early 1900s? And we can also tee up, so from the outside quite nice, and from the back quite rough because they didn't need to be seen. And they should have been, again, the earth should fill over and run over the top of these. By building them like this, it's going to capture the water and put it in there, so indication that either the earth has been removed, or because they hadn't finished them yet, they hadn't put the backfill in. So another example of almost certainly this was unfinished. So now we go down to 23, 25 and 27. I'm going to skip forward these. I was going to use the Google Earth view to put these in, but anyway, what I've shown you up to this section, which from number 1 up to number 19 is really what carries on throughout, but especially down from 30 down to 42, the walls have been stripped down or less completed, so we'd just be repeating what I've shown before. So those tool marks, the indents, the little holes on the face, but 27 and 26. So the way I numbered these stones was based on this diagram from Jean-Pierre Protzen, wall sections 26 and 27. Again, you can just sort of match the design of them. So 26, 27. back over on 24 as well, I couldn't get a really nice photo, but you can see a lot of these tool marks, and this is interesting because this is one of the larger stones that still has these scoop marks going on in there. But zoom in a little bit, 26 and 27. So again, Proton, he's folded it out, so because it's a corner there, but alright. There's a bit better view, and just in that yellow box, and I've just contrasted it a little bit so you can see. So this is another example of this sort of unfinished pattern where the stones have been still quite rough on top, ready to, either they're going to be flattened off to complete the wall, or another layer was going to be put on top. Here's an old comparison between what it looks like now and what it looked like back, I think 1905, could be in the 1920s, but yeah, this place has been really tidied up, and there was a lot of destruction, quarry work going on. Probably even noticed a hill in the background. This also applies on another hill that I showed a little bit earlier. I didn't mention it, but I think there's a lot's been going on in this place, whether they was a sand mine or to build for concrete or whatever. Quite a bit of stuff's happened. So that's sections 26 and 27. You can use this stone as a reference because we see it there. So that's what it used to be like and what it's like now. Now this is an aerial view. You can see the sawtoothed pattern. And the question was, is Sacsayhuaman, was it a fortress? Let's look at the geography. And so up to the north here of Cusco we have Tambo Mache. Tambo, as in Olante Tambo or Tambo Mache. It was basically a storage facility. So where soldiers, workers would store their equipment and that type of thing as well. But it's also, this place is essentially a fortress as well, because it's looking down. This is the old road. See, there's one platform and one platform on the other side. Did it serve a religious function, social function as well? Almost certainly. But it also was an important point because it guarded the road coming into Cusco. And I just highlighted the roads there, and just like with the old Roman roads in Europe, the old Inca roads are still in use today because they just, it was convenient to build there, but also they knew where to build their roads because they knew a thing or two about road building. And so from Tambo Mache, that road leading into Cusco passes through and near Sacsayhuaman. So now Sacsayhuaman is, Tambo Mache guards the road, Sacsayhuaman is guarding these other roads coming into the city. From there, I'll see a bit in a moment, but there are steep hills on this side. So you get it's a high view, so you get an excellent view over the city, across to the other side, but also the approaches to the city as well. Perfect place to put a fortress. So there's, I've just highlighted those in red, the sawtooth walls, and that's that part there. So multiple tiers, multiple levels. So protecting the city from the north. And it is, these walls would make a great fortress. Not so much if you're using slingshots against guns, but even then, still great fortress. Now, of course, they're attacking the wall from the north and attacking the main wall. Well, that's great, but that reminds me, so I thought, no, this can't be a fortress, because I'm so used to see, of most presentations, documentaries only focus on this part of this particular site. So it would be a great fortress as long as they agree to attack from that particular angle, which made me think of Maginot Line, French built to defend against any German invasion, especially after World War I. They built this really strong line, but along the German border, but the line of defence along the Luxembourg and Belgian border not so strong. So instead of attacking at the strong point where the fortresses were built, the Germans just went around. And so these walls would be great. We'll just attack them from the side, but a little bit further investigation. So there we see again these really steep sides on and then we have the wall going across, but let's just have a look at that. So from the north, great defences. However, I was able to get on from Google Earth, so now you can see the westerly side. Again, so much of the stone has been removed, but we see multiple levels of stone walls. Now, if you were to add palisades, say like big spiky, sticks sticking out and fences and stuff, that would even strengthen it even more so. Alright, so on the southern side, again, lots of levels of walls built there. Even with only traces of it left, you still get an idea of the defensive potential. There's a great lookout here as well, and again you can see the walls of stones being mostly stripped, but was there. And on the eastern side, and the stones have been stripped out, but levels of defence. So there's another bank over the top here. So that's where the photos show it. Now I'm almost certain that there was, where I couldn't get the photos of it, to fill in those gaps in between. So it's encircled by stone walls. So you could fill in those gaps. So whether it's an Iron Age hill fort, controlling means of, roads and rivers, control the communication lines, got a good height so you get a good view, you can see people coming from a distance, multiple layers of defence. So even if they crack the first bank, well, they got to do it all over again and again and again until they get to the top, which was the same principle in medieval castles, layers of defence. Alright, so Saksaywaman, it would be difficult to design and position a better fortress. There are indications now, for instance, up here on the top, or that's not, well, it sort of could be like, but there was more going on. But even in the, every fortress is essentially a little small town, so you'd want sort of, administration, storage, all that going on. Old castles had chapels in them as well, so, religion, have a little school building as well. Some suggest that this was an astronomical observatory as well. Well, why not? But just because it's one doesn't mean it wasn't the other. But if this wasn't a fortress, the designers, the builders, hit on the best fortress design purely by accident, both in the structure and the position. Now, one of the reasons why the northern side is still so intact, even though a lot of it has been removed, is because the sides closest to Cusco is where most of the stone has been heavily stripped. So if we go back, those sections closer to the city are the ones that have been stripped more closely. The north side has also got larger stones, makes it more difficult. But as I showed earlier, those blocks that had the grooves cut in them, like the false joins, I can't see how that would be. People were quarrying it to split it for more convenient use, because there's so much stone still left around, and also in a much more convenient position. Those false joins, I'm almost certain now, were cheats. We want to keep the idea going, but again, couldn't design a better fortress, couldn't place it any better. And why is the northern side so intact? Well, because it's furthest away, most difficult. So the destruction of a fortress, removing of stones, and the question of, yes, it was a fortress, or the most accidental, best designed fortress in human history. Now, was it ever finished? So we look again at those wall sections 1 and 2. You can see, well, this was not stripped, this was unfinished. Wall section 7 is another great example of it. Section 16 and in 26 and 27, these are not the only ones. So was it ever completed? Almost certainly not. Was it a fortress? Almost certainly yes. So with that, there's a tour of Saksaywaman and some other interesting features going on. I want to look at this a little bit further, because it's part of the body of things, whether Nkati can lift it. The one that's always is, the polygonal walls is one of, how did they do it? I've done videos on that in the past. I'm going to do a recap because it's this whole thing: symmetry, precision vases, precision this, impossible, can't do that at all. There's nothing really. Polygonal walls was what's left over, and then what last refuge of a scoundrel. Well, you build me a pyramid. I want to see you make yourself pharaoh and accumulate thousands, and an army into that. Well, okay, you've got me there. I'm not going to build a pyramid. Because I can't. I don't have that power. And all right, with that, cheers. Have a good one, and a few more to come. It's very interesting looking at these places and all the other little side issues that go with it. So SGD, have a lovely weekend.